The Kidnapped Bride. This is a love story about an abducted, newly married virgin bride who was stolen by Muslim Mujahideen invaders and sold as a slave. It has been written in English and translated into Arabic by Dr. A. Ahmed. Copyright. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages in a review for printing in a newspaper, general magazine, school journal, or university article. All the characters in this book are fictitious, and any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is merely coincidental. Chapter 1. Muslim Mujahideen invade a Dinka village. It was mid-June when dark autumn clouds poured heavy rain over the little village called Tawila, where the Dinka girl Ayan was born, brought up, and lived for 16 years. Nothing bothers Ayan and her people more than rain. Anything can happen when the sky gets angry and sends lightning, floods, and thunderstorms. In the blink of an eye, a hut can take off and fly away like the feathers of a dead eagle, leaving its inhabitants without cover. The sky fire would set the hut on flame and send everyone out into the streets. However, there is nothing that poor villagers fear more than a flood. Worse than any other natural disaster, a flood can destroy an entire village and sometimes wipe it and its inhabitants out of existence. So, on that fateful morning, Ayan, her parents, her two brothers, and her little sister gathered near the door of their old hut and waited for God to decide their fate. The sky poured rain all night and continued until the early morning. The old and wise men and women of the village warned the foolish boys and girls of the possibility of a devastating flood. The village is built on the foot of a tall mountain. Therefore, it is expected that water will accumulate throughout the night, and eventually, it may cause flooding in the village. The sound of thunder made it difficult to tell whether a flood was approaching or not. As the poor villagers awaited God's judgment for their sins, the loud explosions of bombs and gunshots changed the atmosphere, as if their heavenly God had changed his ancient ways of punishing the poor South Sudan people and using human beings. He created deadly military devices to exercise his wrath on the enemies of Allah and his prophet, Muhammad, the so-called infidels who are unclean and defiled Christians. For a time, wise and foolish alike were confused and did not know whether to flee, hide, or wait for their death. A wise man who lived elsewhere before he fled to the village knew what was going on and shouted to Ayan's father to run for his life. The man shouted, Janjaweed. If he had said that the cruel soldiers of Zubair Pasha had come back to life and were about to attack the village to rape the women and subject the men to slavery or otherwise, the barbaric soldiers of Abdullah ibn Abi al-Sar, who had brought the curse of the Arab religion to Sudan, had risen from hell and invaded the village and were about to convert the Christian people to Islam by the edge of the sword, perhaps Ayan and her parents were not afraid of the news. The Arab Janjaweed who were Muslim Mujahideen came that morning not only to abuse and kill Ayan and her Christian people, but also to rape the village itself. Their dirty feet and deadly weapons set fire to every hut and destroyed everything the southern villagers owned. They ride horses and carry machine guns. They hid their faces with black turbans, making them look like devils on horses. The term, Janjaweed, has been mistranslated into English as warriors on horses. If the word Janjaweed is translated literally, it means devils on horses. In Arabic language, Jan means devil and Jawad means horse. The jinn on the horse. The people of South Sudan called the Janjaweed Marahil, meaning nomadic tribes. The Janjaweed are organized militias affiliated with the northern Arab tribes, such as the Masiriyah and Rizgat, who are in the southern region of Darfur in Sudan. These militias are armed by the Islamic government of Khartoum under the pretext of protecting the region from attack by the southern rebels and Darfur rebels. Janjaweed raids on Dinka villages have been going on for a long time. The Janjaweed were notorious for racist rhetoric, massacres, rape, and forced displacement. In Darfur province, the Janjaweed launched raids, bombings, and attacks on villages, killing civilians based on ethnicity, raping women, and stealing land, goods, and herds of livestock. Today, they are known as the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. They were moved from the western region of Darfur and spread throughout Sudan. They are used by the Islamic government to destroy any opposition group that may try to rise up against their authority. But by creating and relentlessly empowering the Janjaweed under their ruthless leader, Mohammed Hamdan Hamidi Daglo, the Sudanese Islamic regime has created a monster that it cannot control and represents a security threat to Sudan and its neighbors. Ironically, the man who terrorized the Darfur region now leads the military-led Sudanese transitional government. The magic turned against the magician when the Janjaweed rebelled against the Sudanese army, and they are now waging a fierce war against it in the capital of Sudan, Khartoum. Furthermore, many Janjaweed warriors in Yemen are fighting with the Saudi-led coalition against the Iran-backed Houthi rebels. Thousands of them also sold themselves as mercenaries in Libya and joined the civil war in that war-torn Arab country. On that black morning, within a few minutes, many southern Christian village people and animals were slaughtered, and all, men, women, and children were driven from their hiding places. The black Arabs appeared to the teen girl Ayan as black demons carrying death on their hands. She saw with her own eyes that her parents were shot and her two brothers stabbed to death. Her baby sister was trampled under the feet of the evil invaders and struggled for a few seconds before giving up her soul. Ayan fell to her knees and waited for the Arabs' bullets. There was nothing to relieve her of the terrible pain that filled her chest except death. At that critical moment, she cried out to God, prayed for her family, and asked for mercy, but the sky closed its doors and God turned his face away. Why did the rain stop at that moment? Why did the flood not come to annihilate the conqueror and the vanquished? Yes, it seems that it was God who helped the Muslim Arabs defeat the so-called infidel Christian enemies of Allah and his messenger Muhammad. It seemed that history had repeated itself and the army of the most merciful God of the Quran Al-Rahman had received help from angelic forces, as is believed to have happened in the Great Battle of Badr when the Prophet Muhammad had preached a satanic cult in the desert of Arabia, which euphemistically called Islam the religion of peace. When God's victory and conquest come, there is no defeat for you. This is what Almighty God said in the Holy Quran. This is how the Janjaweed Muslim Mujahideen explained their victory on that fateful morning. Unfortunately, Ayan was neither killed nor raped to death, but was taken prisoner of war as a slave girl or Sabiya or Jariya, as was done by the Muslim Mujahideen to the infidel women of their defeated enemies in the time of the Prophet Muhammad and during the Islamic invasions which euphemistically called Muslim conquests. The Arab soldier who killed her family members and later saved her life claimed her as his slave, or prisoner of war. When the Muslim raiders finished their brutal slaughter of men, women, and children, they tied the exhausted young women and underage girls together and forced them to stand in long lines. The girl Ayan was confined among the female captives somewhere in the first row. Her eyes were red and her face was swollen due to the smoke of the burning huts and her constant tears. Her many tears cannot rid her of the sadness that is eating away at her chest like cancer. She understood that she would have to live with the oryx for the rest of her miserable life. How could she forget a day like this when her dear family members were slaughtered before her eyes like animals? She hates the evil Arab man who did not hesitate to stomp his dirty feet on the tender body of her baby sister. She cannot forget how her old parents were begging for their lives when they were dragged from the hut and shot in the head. She can never erase the images of hundreds of elderly men and women in the village who were brutally killed by cowardly Arab Janjaweed bullets. From early morning until noon, Ayan and the other girls stood on their feet and waited for the Arabs to gather their spoils and destroy the rest of the village. None of the men survived. Many children were strangled and trampled under the feet of the invading Muslims. Likewise, elderly women were disposed of by the firing squad. Those who were hit by stray bullets were dragged from huts and shot in the head. Only young, strong women and underage girls survived. By noon, the sun was finally able to clear the dark sky with thick smoke and shine everywhere. It is a blessing and a curse for female prisoners. They have not eaten food or quenched their thirst since the sky rained those black demons on their safe village. The hot sun dried up the fluids in their bodies and caused some girls to faint. Ayan is a young, tall, strong, and beautiful girl. Therefore, she can resist the hot sun for a while. Then the evil Muslim invaders dragged the fainting girls into the trees. None of the Arab invaders tried to find out who among the wounded girls was dead or alive. They have more things to plunder. They are still busy searching for gold and money under the rubble. For the vultures in the sky and the wild beasts in the forest, they left the corpses of victimized villagers and their dead animals, but for the southern rebels, they left nothing. Even local weapons, such as they collected spears, axes, swords, and daggers. Chapter 2. A captive bride from the Dinka tribe. Ayan almost dragged her feet when the Muslim invaders ordered her and the other Christian girls to step forward. They were all tied with ropes and walked in a line behind the Janjaweed. Some Arabs carried long whips in their hands and beat the body of any girl who refused to walk fast. Ayan fell on her face and could not stand up on her own. The whip cut through her delicate body like a sharp sword. Her voice failed her when she tried to cry. Another strong Dinka girl knelt on her fallen body and helped her to her feet. The Arab man continued to flog her body until she got to her feet and continued walking. With eyes full of tears, Ayan began to walk away from her village. She advanced physically, but her spirit continued to cling to her old village. She saw vultures flying overhead in the sky, waiting to feed on the corpses of her family and people. On that fateful day, the beautiful girl Ayan remembered the day she was engaged to her prospective future husband. There are only 2 months left before she gets her visa and plane ticket and flies to her husband in America. Although she had married him in his absence, she hadn't seen him in years. She remembered him when he was a little boy 10 years old. Since he left the village and moved to the big town, she had never seen him again. She heard that he finished his studies and went to the greatest Arab city called Khartoum to learn more. A few years later, she heard that he had traveled to India to attend university. Eventually, Ayan learned that Malwal had become a refugee and immigrated for resettlement in a big city in the United States of America. Of all the boys who left the village and went to the towns, Ayan was not interested in anyone except Malwal. She always enjoyed hearing news about him. One day she heard some news that made her sweat from head to foot. Malwal had sent a letter to his parents and asked for the hand of Mr. Majak's daughter, Ayan, in marriage. She liked the news, but pretended to be upset by it. It was considered proper behavior in Sudan for a girl to act angry when she heard that someone was going to marry her. Ayan's parents then asked Malwal to send money equivalent to the price of 100 cows as dowry for their daughter's marriage. Each cow was priced at $100. So, as soon as Malwal sent $10,000, the village elders met and solemnized Ayan's Christian marriage to him. It has been a year since Ayan got married to Malwal. For some time, the groom could not convince the immigration authorities in the United States of America that he had married a Sudanese girl without his presence. How can he marry a girl in his village when he has not visited his country for 7 years? Therefore, he was required to provide substantial evidence that he had been in contact with her either through written correspondence such as letters, emails, or telephone calls. For 6 months, the groom, Malwal, corresponded with his bride, Ayan, and thus collected enough evidence. Finally, U.S. immigration authorities were convinced that he loved the girl in question and married her in an arranged Christian marriage or traditional African wedding. Once Malva obtained the visa, he wrote to his bride and told her the good news. Unfortunately, by then, he was bankrupt. He spent every dollar he earned on his bride and her family. So, he asked his bride to wait at least a few months until he could earn or borrow $2,000 to buy her ticket to fly her from Sudan to America. In addition, Malwal is expected to hold a wedding party when his beautiful bride, Ayan, arrives in the United States and invites at least 500 Sudanese citizens residing in the same American city so that his community can recognize his arranged marriage. He had to feed all 500 guests, including their young children and those who would just show up uninvited. Unexpected guests at such a happy celebration are always more numerous than those who are officially invited. Moreover, the Sudanese church pastor asked the groom Malwal to bring his bride Ayan upon her arrival at his church before the celebration party so that God would bless her. Because he will bless the newly wedded couple spiritually, the pastor expects them to bless him financially. So far, Mawal has borrowed money from many people and received a big loan from the bank. Therefore, he has to work 2 jobs to pay off his many debts. It has been a month since he sent the plane ticket to his beautiful bride, Ayan. He has booked her flight and therefore knows the exact day of her arrival in the United States. Chapter 3. A dangerous robber on the highway. In the meantime, the kidnapped Christian bride Ayan and the other captive Dinka girls continued to follow the Muslim Janjaweed invaders to their hometown in western Sudan. Some girls couldn't stand on their feet for a week's walk. Those whom the Arabs judged to be weak and dying were left behind in the jungle for wild beasts and vultures to feed on their carcasses while they were alive before they died completely. The most painful and humiliating experience in life is being a slave. Slavery has been abolished, thanks to God, in all parts of the world except in some Muslim countries such as Sudan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Mauritania, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Somalia. In Islam, God seemed very persistent and stubborn because he swore to himself and would not repent that as long as he lived, a man had the right to marry 4 wives at the same time and sleep with his female captives, slave girls, or female prisoners of war without marrying them. How could he change his mind when he promised 72 beautiful virgins in heaven to his followers who were ready to blow themselves up for the cause of jihad for the sake of Allah? Ayan had never traveled such a long distance in her entire life. She walked with the other girls for 3 days, eating almost no food, and drinking only the little water their captors allowed. They were deliberately starved to prevent them from escaping. They walked most of the day and rested at night. At night, the kidnappers lit a fire to keep away the wild beasts. Dangerous creatures like snakes and scorpions were as common in the forest as flies. Some girls were bitten by poisonous serpents at night, and in the morning were discovered dead or dying. Their captors left them to the vultures and beasts to finish the job. On the 4th day, Ayan and her kidnapped friends faced a more fundamental problem than they had experienced so far. Based on an ancient Sudanese war custom, captive girls were supposed to be given 3 days to mourn their dead relatives before their masters slept with them. Being ignorant of such a warlike custom, Ayan and her friends believed that their masters followed rare Islamic morals and would not touch them unless they married them. On the 4th day, while the hyena was patiently waiting for its prey to sleep, the Arabs waited 3 days before proceeding to rape their captive girls. Some tribes in Sudan have changed moral laws by making evil good and wrong right. For example, there is a tribe where a man is not allowed to marry a woman unless he breaks into someone's house or shop and steals from him. Another tribe only married its daughter to a man who kills another man and whose victim's blood appears on his spear or sword. Although these customs are illegal in Sudan, they are still followed. But these customs were nothing compared to the behavior of a group of people who took pride in stealing and killing, and whose actions were honored in Sudan as heroic. Some of their men were highly praised, and so thousands of poems and songs were written to honor their so-called acts of bravery. These heroes have been mentioned in great novels, and sometimes their stories have been reenacted on radio, television, and in theaters. These honorable men are known as Hambada. The term Hambada has no equivalent in the English language and is most strongly associated with armed robbers and highwaymen, such as Robin Hood and his gang. 2 prominent heroes in the history of Sudan were known as Wad Daya and Asha al-Baytait. Many novels and poems have been written describing the brave deeds of Wad Daya. What did Wad Daya do to deserve such an honor? He and his gang used to act like Robin Hood and attack caravans and shepherds in the wilderness and steal their livestock and money. If this is what the great Hambati did, what was honorable and praiseworthy of his actions? Isn't this what the Janjaweed invaders did to the Dinka girl Ayan and her family and people? But if you ask this question to anyone in Sudan, they will tell you that Wad Daya was a brave man because he used to carry out his actions in a heroic way. He is a heroic thief, and this is a contradictory term because a thief is a criminal, not a hero. Despite this, Al-Hambadi Wad Daya is considered in Sudan a heroic and brave man. Like the Muslim invaders, they are considered brave heroes despite their killing of infidel men, stealing their property, raping their women, occupying their lands, and enslaving their children and free women. This means that Islam makes evil good and wrong right. This is an oxymoronic statement and difficult to explain in words, but can be best demonstrated in action. Before going into that, we should check who the famous Hambati was at the time our story took place. The famous Sudanese hero, Wad Mahira bint Aboud, was the Hambati in Darfur province when the Muslim invaders stole the bride, Ayan, and her Dinka companions from their village in South Sudan. Whether it was a coincidence or whether he was having mother by that name, Mahira bint Aboud was the most honored woman in Sudanese history for her brave actions during wartime. Through her songs and war ululations, the Sudanese forces were able to fight bravely against powerful invading armies such as the British and the Turks. Some believe that Wad Mahira inherited the spirit of courage from the mother of the Sudanese nation, Mahira bint Aboud. Despite her fame and greatness, some tribes in the Darfur region claim that Mahira bint Aboud was a fadadia, a prostitute, a pimp lady, and the owner of a house bar that sold alcohol and prostitution. In one of his honorable encounters with his victims, the brave Hambati Wad Mahira bint Aboud is believed to have uttered the following heroic words. We, the Hambata, have a known origin. Without the fights of men, we have no other deeds. We don't creep toward it, but we take it with red eye. We do not steal like a thief in the night or come from behind. We approach it from the front like a lion and take it from its owner in broad daylight. The Hambata did not consider themselves lawless thieves, but men of valor, and society agreed. The man who encounters them in the wilderness is doomed. On the sixth day, the Muslim invaders reached the border of their district and had to travel another day to enter their big town. The day before, they had rested for several hours before resuming their journey. By then, the kidnapped Christian bride Ayan and the other captive Dinka girls had turned into servants and sex slaves. They were often severely beaten, brutally gang-raped, and forced to cook. They walked for 6 days, dragging their raped and exhausted bodies. They were deliberately starved to prevent escape attempts. The Janjaweed used sticks and whips to punish any captive girl who showed resistance or disobedience. On that day, near sunset, the Janjaweed encountered a group of Hambata led by the heroic robber Wad Mahira bint Aboud. It is as if the earth suddenly opened and Satan and his demons emerged from the abyss. 5 men on camels versus 25 men on horses may not seem like a fair match. However, the 25 Muslim invaders saw Wad Mahira and his 4 men as if they were 5,000 soldiers. Peace be upon you, O sheikhs of the Arabs, Wad Mahira shouted, loud as thunder. None of the Janjaweed uttered a word. Their mouths were closed in fear. They were like hyenas who suddenly heard the roar of a lion. Wad Mahira continued, I want the young women and your cattle, and if you think this is an unfair deal, I will take your horses too and make you walk to your town on foot. We traveled to South Sudan and fought brave Dinka men before defeating them and taking their women and livestock, the Janjaweed leader said. So, do you think you and your men have enough courage and strength to fight Wad Mahira bint Aboud and his brave men? Then the huge Hambati folded his arms, sneering. We are Arabs and Muslims like you, and we also believe in the oneness of God and the followers of our Prophet Muhammad. May God bless him and grant him peace, and we must fight the enemies of Allah and his messenger, the immoral infidel Christians, and not fight among ourselves. Although the Janjaweed spoke confidently, their fear betrayed them by changing their eyes and shifting their feet. I am a Hambati man and fighting men is my profession. Wad Mahira jumped off his camel and swaggered back and forth in front of the Janjaweed, proudly thrusting his chest out. Even if I encounter Prophet Muhammad and his army of 1,000 mujahideen in the wilderness, I will fight them and take what they have. He stopped and faced his opponents with a fierce frown. The Arab Janjaweed put their heads together for a moment and discussed with gestures and muted tones. The commander nodded and said to Wad Mahira, take the cattle and leave the captive young women to us. Wad Mahira swung one of his strong legs over his camel and pulled himself up. A gun appeared in his left hand. I want the Dinka women, the cattle, and your horses, and if you don't want to see the sunrise tomorrow, try to stop me. Before the Janjaweed leader could bargain further, he heard gunshots and saw 10 of his men shot dead and falling from their horses. No one shot them except Wad Mahira. Now you are 15 warriors, and I am one. Get off your horses and let us perform a heroic show in front of the girls of the Dinka tribe. The 15 Janjaweed were forced to get off their horses and drop their weapons. Then they waited for Wad Mahira as a god to decide their fate. Unarmed himself, the huge Hambati man jumped off his camel. Come all of you and wrestle with me. If you can knock me down, I will let you go and take nothing from you. I am Wad Mahira bint Abood, and I gave you my words in front of my men and these beautiful Dinka girls. Then the Janjaweed leader sent 3 of his men to fight the huge Hambati man who stood like a mountain in front of them. Wad Mahira took the first man and used him as a stick to beat the other 2 men. The 2 men laid flat half dead in front of him. To further demonstrate his strength, the big man swung the man 3 times over his head and threw him away. The man fell 10 meters behind the captive Dinka girls, like being thrown by a slingshot or an arrow fired out of a bow. The commander of the Muslim invaders knelt down and begged Wad Mahira bint Abood, "Please, sir, the greatest hero of Sudan, take everything. Save our lives only because we are now at your mercy and compassion." Chapter 4. An American groom waits for his Dinka bride to arrive in the USA. On the day that the beautiful Dinka bride was expected to arrive from Sudan, her handsome groom Malwal woke up at 4 a.m. and headed to the international airport to receive his virgin bride Ayan. He carefully ironed his clothes, showered, and shaved his hair so that his sweet bride would see that he was the most handsome man in the international airport. The groom is a tall, young man with a strong, athletic body. He was 24 years old when he married Ayan. This age is considered too late in his village for a man to marry a 16-year-old girl. Typically, boys are married off as soon as they have deepened their voices, while girls are married off any time after they reach the age of 10. The groom Malwal accompanied about 30 Sudanese men and 40 Dinka women with their young children to the international airport. In his apartment, in the church, and in the wedding celebration hall, he spent a lot of money to welcome his beautiful virgin bride. On that day, some Sudanese women cooked the meat of 7 slaughtered sheep and 1,000 chickens to prepare for the big celebration. Those lambs were bought from a farm in the USA and slaughtered by the knives of the Dinka buyers themselves who were sent by Malwal. Of course, the groom paid for their prices. Besides, all kinds of alcoholic beverages and soft drinks were purchased. Therefore, Malwal may need to work continuously for 5 years to settle his debts, and then only if he works 2 jobs a day. The British plane landed as scheduled at 7 in the morning. As passengers began to file into the arrivals hall, Malwal's eyes were like a camera zoomed in and focused. Every image of a young woman that does not match the cocoon color of his African Sudanese bride emerges from his vision like the sun chasing a passing summer cloud. Even after every passenger disappeared, Malwal and the 70 Sudanese guests continued to search for the miraculous apparition of the beautiful Dinka bride. They stood and waited for a long time before they accepted the bitter truth that their sweet virgin bride did not come from their beloved homeland. If the president of the Sudanese Association had said that the plane had arrived without a pilot, Malwal's mind would have accepted such an impossible possibility, but not that his bride, Ayan, was not among the passengers. Maybe because Ayan can't read English, she went to the departure hall instead of the arrival hall, another Sudanese man said. The man said these words to the groom's relief after hearing the president of the South Sudanese Association speak his mind, frankly. The man had noticed that Malwal's soul had left his body after the president said that his bride, Ayan, was not among the passengers. So, the groom and the others ran to the departure hall to search for the missing bride. By then, Malwal was sweating profusely and his body was shaking from head to foot. Whenever someone spoke to him, he only responded by nodding his head. He lost his voice when the association's president finally confronted him with the bitter truth that his bride did not come from Sudan. Before speaking of such an abhorrent life sentence as marital execution, the president consulted 3 airport offices to ensure that Malwal's bride did not board the plane at Khartoum International Airport. Moreover, it turned out that the Virgin Bride Ayan Majak was not at Heathrow International Airport among the passengers who traveled by plane from the United Kingdom to the United States. When the unpleasant truth was forced upon the frightened groom, his physical strength could no longer support his body. He immediately collapsed and fell into a coma. He was taken by ambulance to the hospital. The Sudanese who came to receive the bride followed the ambulance to the hospital. As soon as their engines started and they pulled up behind the ambulance, their cell phones began spreading the sad news throughout the city. On that fateful day, the sad news traveled faster than cars. Every Sudanese man or woman who received the news passed it on to 3 or 4 other people. In less than an hour, more than 400 cars arrived at the general hospital. The hospital staff was disturbed by the huge gathering of the Sudanese community, and many doctors and nurses became concerned about the health of the patient, who lost consciousness and collapsed from the horror of the great psychological and emotional shock. Due to a lack of proper communication and misunderstandings due to the language barrier, the hospital staff believed that someone had killed the patient's bride on the same day as their wedding. This false report was thrown at visitors by hospital staff, and by lunchtime, 70% of Sudanese people believed it and passed it on to their friends and relatives. Meanwhile, the Dinka groom, Malwal Dang, remained in a deep coma for a week before his brain started working properly again. Chapter 5. A beautiful girl appears in the house of the Imam of the Grand Mosque. In Africa, 99% of a woman's beauty is measured by the attractiveness of her sexy body. The beauty of her face, the length of her hair, and the color of her skin are not matters of immense importance. Therefore, an African man looks at a woman's side to decide whether she is beautiful or not. Breasts and buttocks are particularly important parts of the female body. The bigger the girl's buttocks, the more fire will be lit in the man's heart. However, large buttocks without noticeably big, high-rise breasts are not important to some tribes. In Sudan, some tribes like the Bagara love high breasts more than large buttocks, and hence most of their poems and songs were written in honor of women's boobs. One of the cities of Bagara was named Al-Nahid, meaning the woman's breasts. One of their singers sang a song about the girl who came to the well to draw water. What I encountered was her large breasts. So how can I not love her? Yet another famous singer sang another beautiful song that said, "The girl with the stabbing breast, which began to pierce, made me mad and also made all the single young men in the city crazy after her." In the city of El Fasher in the Darfur region, in the house of Blessed Maulana, the Imam of the largest mosque, a beautiful girl was seen one day. The girl has the most sexually attractive body the youth of the city has ever seen. Her beauty is unique, not because of her beautiful eyes, curly afro hairstyle, cacao color, big ass, or average height, but because of her breasts. Her breasts are not like other girls' boobs. They are not too big, not too small, or too flat. They vibrate when she walks, move up and down when she talks, and advance and retreat when she breathes. There's a sweet song that says, "And the tits are shaking, and that's what makes us crazy." Every boy goes crazy after her. Winning her heart has become a fierce competition in the city. Tribe, wealth, and religion played important roles. The competition soon narrowed down to 3 distinct families. 3 young men from 3 famous tribes, the Hamar, the Misriya, and the Rizgat, competed among themselves to win the heart of that beautiful and sexy girl. At first, people thought that the girl loved the 3 boys because each one of them claimed to have won her heart. Competition and rumors of winning the girl's love do not matter. What does it matter what Maulana Sheikh Abdul Razak decides? Everyone thought that he was her guardian, and therefore he would be the one who would choose her life partner among the 3 families. Here religion, politics, and ethnicity play particularly important roles. Religiously speaking, Maulana might lose half of his followers in the Grand Mosque if he rejected the boy from the Rizgat tribe. Politically, the boy's father, from the Misriya tribe, had recently won the elections and became a member of parliament in Khartoum city and a legislative representative for the city of El Fasher. Ethnically, the Hamar people are the purest Arab tribe in the western region of Sudan. The Honorable Imam, Maulana Abdul Razak is known for his righteousness in all aspects, except that he suffers from an ethnic problem. Accordingly, people believed that their religious leader was in an inconvenient situation. So, he must seek divine guidance to make the right choice. As a man who claimed to fear no creature except his creator, Maulana would likely make a racist choice. No one knows how that beautiful girl landed in the house of the Honorable Imam. One day she appeared inside his house and some female visitors saw her. These neighboring women tried to find out who this beautiful girl was from the wife of Maulana. The honorable wife swore on her father's grave that she knew nothing about the beautiful girl. She said one evening, her blessed husband came home and brought the girl with him. The distinguished Imam said to her, "The girl is a responsibility and a trust in his neck, and if something bad happens to her, he will be held accountable for it on the day of resurrection." Maulana's wife accepted the responsibility and treated the girl as one of her servants. This wife is 55 years old and has 3 daughters who are married and have sons and daughters, and some of their daughters are married and have children as well. Another mystery about this strange girl is that she is not a young Muslim woman and does not pray 5 times a day. It is obvious to anyone that the beautiful girl is from South Sudan and from the Dinka tribe. How did the Imam of the mosque agree to keep an infidel Christian girl in his holy residence? Maulana himself answered this question when asked by a group of believers. Our honorable Prophet Muhammad, may God bless him and grant him peace, had a Christian female slave named Maria the Coptic. These religious issues were settled as soon as the girl was seen in Maulana's house. What is important to the people now is which boy among the 3 tribes will the blessed Imam choose as a suitable husband for the beautiful Christian girl who lives in his holy abode. Chapter 6. She is a trust amana hanging around my neck. The Honorable Sharif, the good Hassan, and the honest Al-Sadiq are the likely candidates for one of them to be the husband of the beautiful Christian girl who lives in Maulana's house, whose name is Ikhlas. Her name means the faithful and loyal girl. Of the 3 boys, only everyone considers Sharif's parents to be pure Arabs with no trace of African Negro roots on them. All the Hamar tribes consider themselves Arabs who have not mixed with Sudanese Africans. Regarding their religion, they believe they were Muslims before the Prophet Muhammad started preaching Islam in Arabia. They are known as the Ashraf, i.e., the nobles, and every family in Sudan and other Arab countries that bears the name of that noble family, the Sharif, has its members claiming to be descendants of the house of the Islamic Prophet Muhammad. In terms of courage, most of the Hambata highway robbers came from that tribe. Therefore, being from such a noble family, Sharif's parents initially refused to accept an African Dinka girl to marry their Arab son, thus tainting their purebred Arabic blood. Since love is blind or does not know social and racial barriers, Sharif is ready to abandon his family and, if necessary, his religious affiliation for the sake of that beautiful girl. He told his parents that he was sick and tired of seeing the girl walking down the street every day with her spear-like breasts, and that he stood like a woman looking at her. Therefore, he swore to God that before the rainy season came the next year, he would impregnate her with Wad Haram or an illegitimate child, even if he has to rape her, if he could not be able to marry her legally through halal Islamic marriage. This threat forced the parents to agree to a halal marriage according to the Holy Book of Allah and the Sunnah of His Messenger Muhammad. However, Sharif's parents agreed to their son's request on one condition. Their son must cover his plate first before covering another family's plate. Most Arab tribes in Sudan believe that a boy has a divine obligation to marry one of his female relatives before he can marry a foreign girl as a second Muslim wife. This custom was likely borrowed from the example of the Prophet Muhammad and his cousin Zainab bint Jahash. Initially, Zainab married Zaid, the Prophet's adopted son. The Prophet's biography tells us that one day the Messenger of Allah, may God bless him and grant him peace, went to visit his son. When he arrived home, his son was not there, but his daughter-in-law was. Zainab was alone in her house or tent. She was white, beautiful, and fit with a sexy body. A wind blew and the tent door opened. The messenger of Allah saw Zainab Mutahazra, which means she was a half-naked woman, and his heart changed. He became sexually aroused, and his dick stood inside his jilbab like the cannon of Ramadan. It is most likely that Zainab had large buttocks because of the hadith in which it was stated that the Prophet, may God bless him and grant him peace, said, "May God bless a hairy man and a woman with cupped buttocks, that is, one with large buttocks." Then a sign from heaven descended upon the Prophet, forcing his son, Zayd, to divorce his beautiful and sexy wife, Zainab, and commanded the Prophet to marry her and have sex with her in a lawful manner. The moral behind the story between the messenger, the lustful father and son Zayd, and the divorce of his beautiful and sexy wife, Zainab, is not clear. But it has become a custom that has been imitated in Islamic societies throughout the long history of Islam. It is a great shame in Sudan for a boy to refuse to marry the first one of the daughters of his uncles and aunts. If he fulfills this condition first, he is free to contract marriage with any other outsider Muslim girl as a second, third, or fourth Muslim wife who has no blood relationship with him. Accordingly, Sharif agreed to marry one of his cousins first before marrying the infidel Christian Dinka girl, because Islam permits marriage to a biblical woman, whether Jewish or Christian, without forcing her to abandon her religion or compelling her to convert to Islam by force. Although he agreed to fulfill his commitment, Sharif asked his parents to keep the matter strictly confidential. All of these things happened in secret and behind closed doors. The blessed Imam, Maulana Sheikh Abdul Razak, did not hear them until one day Sharif's father approached him with the engagement of his son. "Who told you that the Dinka girl, Ikhlas, needs a husband?" Imam al-Mubarak asked, laughing. "Every woman needs a man. Otherwise, how will she have children?" Sharif's father replied, "Ikhlas is not my daughter, nor am I her guardian. She was kept in my house like a trust hanging around my neck and in my hand. Eventually, her guardian will come to take her." Then Maulana extended his hands in an apologetic gesture. Sharif's father shook his head and asked, "Where is her father or her guardian so that I can go to him and ask for her hand in marrying my son?" The blessed Imam shrugged his shoulders and replied, "I don't know who her father is. A man came to my house one night and made me swear on the Holy Quran that I would keep this girl a trust around my neck until he returned." Al-Sharif's father insisted, "If the man does not return, what will you do with the girl?" "I will continue to keep her in my house." Maulana pointed to his residence. "She's a big help to my wife." Red was creeping into Sharif's father's skin. "Blessed Lord, you did not understand my question. I meant to say, if the guy doesn't come back, what are you going to do with the girl?" The father extended his hands in a final plea. "Of course, you won't keep her unmarried for long. She may be driven by her sexual desire and fall in love with one of the boys. A boy will do haram sex to the girl if you refuse to give her to him in a halal marriage." Maulana's calm expression did not change. "You are making assumptions. So far, I have had no difficulty in maintaining Ikhlas, and if she continues to live in my house, I trust that God will turn her away from sinful ways." Sharif's father moved back and forth, rubbing his hands. "Blessed Maulana, the girl Ikhlas is already suffering from emotional problems in her heart. 3 boys, including my son Sharif, are crazy in love with her." Maulana's face suddenly changed from being calm and gentle to upset and ugly. He shouted at Sharif's father, saying, "What do you mean by this, Sheikh Talha? Do you think the girl Ikhlas is a bitch being chased in my house by boys like dogs do in the street?" "You misunderstood my words again, our blessed Imam." Sharif's father wiped his forehead and continued, "I meant to say that 3 boys from 3 noble families love Ikhlas, and each one of them wants to marry her. Of course, it is natural for young men to love a beautiful young woman like her." The Imam rolled his eyes and spoke angrily, "There are hundreds of beautiful, unmarried girls in the city. Why do only boys care for Ikhlas?" Sharif's father was silent and thought for a moment before answering, because Ikhlas is a very beautiful girl. The Imam shook his head and extended a dismissive hand. "Brother Talha, I rejected your son's engagement for Ikhlas, and do not ask me again about her hand in marrying your son Sharif." Chapter 7. A Dangerous Trip to Africa. Meanwhile, the groom, Malwal, was left with no choice but to risk traveling to South Sudan to search for his missing bride, Ayan. Before leaving the United States of America, he left no stone unturned as he tried to solve the mysterious disappearance of his beautiful bride. Through a Sudanese church pastor and his community association leader, Malwal was able to contact several people in Sudan and inquire about his lost bride. The investigation took 3 months before the bewildered groom finally made up his mind and decided to travel to Africa. After heroic efforts, the pastor of the Sudanese church and the president of the association were able to raise enough money for Malwal to buy his plane ticket and carry with him an additional $200. Before the groom traveled from America to Kenya, he gathered some conflicting information about his missing bride. Some Sudanese in the United States were able to convince their relatives and friends living in South Sudan to risk their lives and go to Ayan's village and find out what happened to her. Malwal had to pay these people before convincing them to take the risk. He spent over $1,000 on these informants. Some of them had spent the money on their personal needs and had forgotten about the groom Malwal and his missing bride, Ayan. Only a few of them were honest and went to the disaster-stricken village of Tawila. They found ruin and destruction, which told them nothing and yet everything. An informant concluded that some bad guys attacked the village, killed everyone, and stole the livestock and women. The reporter of such information didn't want to come to a hasty conclusion about who the bad guys were. He reported that the village was destroyed and the bride most likely perished along with her family. The second informant reported the same, but accused the Muslim Mujahideen invaders who were called the Arab Janjaweed of committing that heinous crime. The third informant blamed North Sudanese army soldiers who often committed such cowardly massacres. The fourth informant produced a possibility that even Malwal refused to believe. He said that a bloody battle broke out between the southern rebels and the villagers over food. The rebels won the battle because they had cannons and machine guns, while the poor villagers used locally bladed weapons such as swords and spears to fight them. When the rebels finished massacring the poor villagers, they took their livestock, food, boys, and girls, and then burned the village. The rebels saved the lives of young men and women because they needed more people to join their cause in their war against the Northern Army. So, most likely the bride Ayan is now a rebel fighter in the jungle. There are more speculations and information that have reached the groom's ears about the destruction and devastation of the village and the disappearance of his beautiful bride, but they are not worth mentioning. The Dinka boy Malwal had encountered racial and political problems with the Khartoum government of the Muslim Brotherhood before fleeing Sudan and ending up in India. He knew and understood that he would be arrested at Khartoum International Airport, taken to one of the ghost houses, and tortured to death by cruel Islamic security men or members of the Janjaweed militia known in Khartoum as the Rapid Support Forces. For this reason, he could not travel directly to Sudan. Instead, he landed in Kenya hoping to smuggle himself across the border into South Sudan. Many Sudanese friends in America tried to prevent him from making this dangerous journey to his motherland. They said that if he managed to avoid the rebels in the forest, he could become a victim of the Sudanese government army, which includes a large number of northern Muslim Arabs and Africans from Darfur. The government army consists of military soldiers and volunteer Islamic fighters known as Mujahideen. Those Muslim volunteer fighters are more dangerous and cause more problems for Christian Southerners than army soldiers. They view the Southerners as infidel Christians and enemies of God and His messenger, and therefore they consider their fighting in South Sudan to be a war of jihad for spreading Islam in the way of Allah. They came to South Sudan to spread Islam and fight the so-called infidel enemies of God. They wanted to Islamize the Christian South. They loved to die as martyrs because of their promise to 72 virgins in paradise. The Quran made them believe that God would marry each of them to 72 virgins in eternal paradise. Those girls are believed to be exceptionally beautiful creatures and eternal virgins. A hadith attributed to the Prophet Muhammad states that whenever a man has sex with one of his 72 lovely wives, she will miraculously become a virgin again. Every time a man's penis breaks her hymen, when he inserts it in her pussy and fucks her, she goes back to being a virgin repeatedly, and that's forever. It is also said that the Virgin of Heaven does not urinate, defecate, or menstruate. Whatever she eats and drinks, it comes out of her body as sweat, and her sweat smells like musk. A man cannot make her conceive a child even if he has sex with her 1,000,000 times. Besides these 72 beautiful virgins, the Quran promised Muslim believers that there would be rivers of wine, milk, and honey in the Garden of Paradise. I wonder what the Virgin would do after she immersed herself in rivers of wine and became dead drunk. Muslim women are not allowed to go to jihad for the sake of God. Islam says that their jihadist wars must be fought on their beds with their husbands. The more a Muslim wife suffers from the pain of sexual intercourse, the more she strives for the sake of God. Muslim women do not have promises from virgin men in the paradise of virgins. The Prophet of Islam promised in an authentic hadith that most Muslim women would go to hell. Finally, the groom Malwal also warned of the possibility of falling victim to the Arab Janjaweed. The Janjaweed militias are more brutal and dangerous than the Muslim Mujahideen in the Sudanese army. At least the Muslim Mujahideen are fighting against the non-Muslim Christians of the south, the infidels, but the Janjaweed kill indiscriminately, both Muslims and non-Muslims. Therefore, it is safer for the Christian bridegroom, Malwal, to travel to hell than to the Democratic Republic of Satan, euphemistically called Sudan. However, all these dangers did not prevent the groom from making his perilous journey to Sudan in search of his beautiful, missing Dinka bride, Ayan.